This is the Motivated Business Show, hosted by me, Mark Terrell, the author of Motivated, the Reluctant Leader's Guide to Building a Business that Sets You Free. In my book, I share the 7-step process to get the measure of your business. M.E.A.S.U.R.E is an acronym that stands for Mirror, Evaluate, Action, Systemize, Unify, Review, and Energize. On each episode, I'll be chatting to a business owner about how they stay motivated and how they've got the measure of their business. So without further ado, let's find out who's joining me on this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Motivated Business Show with me, Mark Terrell. Today's topic is all about AI, and I've been meaning to get Luke on the podcast for a while. He's eluded me up until this point, but today is the day we're going to talk about AI. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it's something that we all need to embrace in some way, and we're probably actually already using it in many ways, but we'll see what comes out of this discussion, and I'm sure there'll be lots to take away with regards to how AI is going to affect our lives going forward. So before we do that, just to remind you of my book. In my book, I share a 7-step process, which I will refer to towards the end of the podcast. And also, if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just to keep the wheels in motion, then you can buy me a coffee. And all those proceeds are used to keep the show going. And also, if you buy me 2 coffees, then I will be more than happy to send you a copy of my book. Right, so with that out of the way, let's bring on today's guest. Welcome, Luke.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Looking forward to our conversation. Firstly, let's give you the opportunity to introduce yourself properly.
So, hello everyone. I'm Luke. I'm the founder of Clarity AI. I've run a few businesses in the past, all in technology, mostly out of Australia. I lived in Australia for 20 years. I've been involved with tech, but I've always had a bit of an unhealthy fascination with AI, right back to the kind of late 90s, which shows my age, when I wrote a genetic algorithm, which apparently are still in use, but you never see them. Obviously, it's all been overtaken by generative AI now. So, about a year and a half ago, I decided that the sort of early versions of the GPTs that we were seeing coming out were quite impressive, and I thought that we were going to start to have a real impact. And so I stopped what I was doing then in technology, and I really doubled down in generative AI, and I've been schooling myself for the last 18 months and building out sort of content and IP, which I'm now taking to organizations and running AI-related projects.
Brilliant, excellent, fascinating. Right, so AI, where do we start? Well, I think the obvious place to start is for you to explain what AI is, and in particular generative AI, as you've mentioned it.
Yeah, okay. So the concept of AI, I see sort of, there's AI and modern AI. Modern AI is sort of around the early 80s. And the primary concept, sort of machine learning, is that instead of actually programmatically creating software, what we're doing is, and I say that's the royal we, I'm not doing this myself, I'm using it myself, is that we're programming AI to learn, and then we feed it information and it learns, and then we use the outcome of that. Mm-hmm. So rather than actually just, like directly programming a business process or a workflow or something. And so that's the sort of beginning of AI. And there's been various evolutions of that and progressions over that, but a real breakthrough in the last sort of 3 to 5 years, where generative AI has become competent enough to use and useful enough to use. And that's quite different, because instead of sort of predicting, being algorithmic or analyzing data, what it's doing is it's generating something new. And it does that by learning off vast data sets and then sort of combining that information. And then by some magic that happens inside this black box, it comes out with new answers, and it's generating answers. So it's sort of fundamentally the same technology, but the use cases for it are very, very different.
Interesting. So I can think back to my days at school when I did computer studies, And one of the things that we were always taught was garbage in, garbage out. So you just mentioned there about data. So if the data's good, I guess you're going to get a good outcome. But the trouble is, if there's lots of data which is maybe not quite so useful or not quite so accurate or whatever, then the output's not going to be quite so good. So is that one of the big considerations with AI, making sure that the data is good data?
When you say data, I assume you're thinking about the sort of training data sets here that which feed into, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about anything that the AI uses as a data set. Whatever the information is, whatever you want to call it, it's data, isn't it?
Right. Okay, so let's break that down with what we call GPTs. So they're the sort of the cutting edge. That's what powers ChatGPT, which I'm sure everybody that is watching will know of. There's multiple ways that you might consider data. So one of them would be the training data sets. So the GPTs, so OpenAI's GPTs are trained on vast quantities of data that we don't know when we don't know exactly what those data sets are. But you can imagine that they would be, most of the data on the internet that is freely available. They're obviously negotiating deals to buy data sets at the moment from various other people. And so that's one portion of it, and the other portion of it is if you're using a front end like a Chat GPT, or you're building your own solutions that use large language models at the back end, you can feed them data at the time that they're running, at the time that you're running a query or doing whatever you're doing with the data set. So in the first instance, it's sort of true, because when you feed in data, you're going to get this huge bell curve, because there's a lot of data. You're going to get this bell curve where there's going to be a sort of consensus in the middle of kind of opinions and views and just and the data, the information, and then there'll be extremes either side. So in some senses, those kind of cancel each other out. Now that's not to say that there are not issues. There definitely are. I mean, there are built-in biases to the data out there on the web in a sort of general sense. But in some cases, they kind of even out just because of the massive volume of data that's being fed into it. The problem is where, of course, the sort of median value is biased because of the source data on the internet. And then the second part, I think, is more what you're saying is more on the button is. If you're using data sets and you're getting a large language model to do analysis of a data set, to go and get and derive information from a local data set, which is often what people want to do because you've got your own proprietary data and you're drawing value out of it. If that data is garbage, then the LLM's not going to know that. It's just going to serve you back, the impression that it's got from that garbage. Now, you could build safety nets into your applications to guard against that, but fundamentally, so at that point, garbage in, pretty much garbage out.
I mean, when I was back in my retail days, I was very we run our business on our E.P.O.S. system, which collected data, obviously with the sales and all that sort of, but there's obviously that system is only as good as the information it gives you, but also it doesn't know the environment is changing. So obviously, you take for instance ice cream. It can generate an order based on normal sales, but if you suddenly know that it's going to be 30 degrees for the next week, then obviously that's not good. So you have to have some input. But I suppose with AI, you can actually give it access to that information with regards to the weather, and then if it knows previously what effect that 30 degrees had, it can actually generate an order based on what it sees the demand's going to be with the weather as part of the calculation. That's an example.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess strictly you could have done that with sort of traditional technologies. I guess the difference with a generative AI application is it might decide that it's going to do that anyway. So the difference is that it's able to, and I've got to be careful when I say it or they, we can get into that later on, but they might spontaneously, because they know that the weather is a factor, might say, I'm going to carry out this activity, which is finding out what the weather's going to be today because I think I need to. Now, I mean, you'd have to build around that, but as opposed to traditional technologies and systems, there is no creativity or generativeness about them. They will just do what they are programmed to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a different, and that's what I spend a lot of time talking to organisations about. It's, how do you think differently about the kinds of systems that you can build, and
Yeah.
how can you build them together? How does traditional technology complement? How can it be complemented by generative AI in the same way, in a similar way that humans, complement traditional technologies?
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the current trends, what's going on out there, what the exciting advancements that AI is sort of introducing into our lives at the moment.
Well, I think it's everywhere. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen. So yes, there's the kind of behemoths out there. OpenAI has sort of led the way and pushed. The ChatGPT has kind of pushed this concept of generative AI into the zeitgeist, and in a sense, it's almost gone too far. In that, I talk to people, and people really think that ChatGPT is generative AI. But now, obviously, all of the other big boys are getting involved. So, we've got, and playing catch up to some extent. Google have released what they call Bard and now Gemini. That will begin to underpin the entire Google suite and be a sort of a next interface and a way to integrate all the data in Google. Similarly, Microsoft are doing the same thing with their Copilot. And Meta obviously are releasing models and open source models, so that's a bit different for them. But it's all happening, and you may have seen the back and forth with the business valuations being affected by AI at the moment, and Nvidia have overtaken. In fact, I think today Nvidia have overtaken Microsoft again, and last week they overtook Apple, and then Apple announced that they were embedding OpenAI into
Yes, I saw the Apple announcement.
Yeah, so the whole industry is just moving around, this new thing, this new generative AI thing, and it's massively affecting valuations.
Yeah. So what about normal businesses then? So not the businesses that are implementing this and bringing it into the marketplace and trying to sell the service as such. What about businesses then? What do you see how businesses are embracing this? Because I think that's the key, isn't it? Because we know if you don't do if you don't keep up and you actually sort of brush things under the carpet, then we know that the sort of things that have happened in the past with like Blockbuster, who didn't embrace the streaming thing, and also like Kodak didn't embrace the digital camera because if they were protecting other things. So how can businesses sort of use AI and try and actually not protect their current status quo, because that's the problem, isn't it? You only, like as you mentioned already, you protect what you see as the existing current situation, but actually AI changes pretty much everything, doesn't it?
Okay, I see there's sort of two streams there as well. I think so. The Microsoft and the Googles, who are kind of the equivalent of your Kodaks and Nokias, and So, for example, Google, I think for the first time in a long time, well, since the birth of search, really, that they are realizing that there's something significant enough that's emerging that is going to change, that is going to disrupt their business model. And that has been, that has been defensible and defended for whatever it is, 30 years. So I think there's that aspect to it, and all of them know it, and all of them are responding. The other is, how do day to day, how do we as sort of, smaller business owners and medium-sized business owners utilize generative AI? And so to some extent, and I've heard other people use this sort of reference or metaphor of electricity, it's like it's seeping in to organizations from the bottom up. And I equate it to, if you're in the space, you'll know this metaphor, like the bring your own device challenge that we had in tech. So basically people started rocking up with, these computers in a phone, and IT departments and tech departments did not know how to manage that. It created all sorts of data security issues. It was a challenge. And I think the same sort of thing is happening now with AI. Organizations are seeing, So I call them tinkerers, and I don't mean that in a sort of derogatory way, but there are people that are playing with this stuff because it's interesting and it's value. It can add value, but there's very little strategy setting going on. Not very much governance, not very much risk management at the moment. And tinkerers are getting sort of really excited about using it because it can provide obvious productivity bonuses and all the rest of it. So I think when I talk to organizations about how they can adopt generative AI, I try and break it out into three different tiers. The first one is keep it simple, off the shelf. There's a whole bunch of applications out there. Try using those applications, but use them sensibly. Put some governance in place to do some risk management. Understand what's going to happen with your data, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I've seen this a lot. People just blanket saying, no, you are not allowed to use any generative AI application because they're focused on risk management. So that's kind of understandable. But I think if you continue to do that, what you were just describing will occur slowly but surely. The rest of the market will become more efficient, more productive, and you won't see those gains. And slowly but surely, it will just seem harder and harder to do business. Now, because of the level of hype and because of the presence in the zeitgeist of generative AI, I don't think many organizations are going to do that. People can't be taken by surprise by this stuff anymore. The information's everywhere. So I think, going back to my three tiers, I think the first thing to do is to put in place some governance, risk management, and then start structurally experimenting with the use of the easy to use tools. And I suggest either ChatGPT, if you're a Google customer, try Gemini. If you're a Microsoft customer, and that would be 99% of businesses, try Copilot. Try and understand what it's good for, what it's not good for, and start there. And then build some knowledge, build some experience, get a feel for what this new phenomena is like and what it's good for, and then get a bit more clever with it. Get a bit more sophisticated. Try building some workflow tools where you're bringing in your own proprietary data, you're adding value to it using generative AI. You might start creating interfaces that serve up information to your internal teams, that accelerate them, so they don't have to go around and search for stuff. They can just ask the bot or the assistant, if it's policies and procedures, what's my leave this week or whatever it is. So do that, and then unless you're a tech company, where you might start here, then and only then I suggest you go a bit more sophisticated than that. So, how can you use generative AI to underpin your current products and services? And that's the point where you're starting to create interfaces that go out to your customers or to your clients, and allowing them to use the AI that you've created. And obviously that's more sophisticated. It's more challenging to build. It's higher risk. But that could really, really impact your bottom line, because you're really leveraging and augmenting your services.
Yeah, and we're talking about efficiency here, aren't we? And using AI in an efficient way. But obviously, there's implications there with regards to employment. So there's a lot of stuff going on around with regards to the fear of unemployment. But obviously, there's always the other side of the coin where it will create employment in different areas. So what do you see about both of those things, though, the people that are likely that are going to lose their jobs? And I suppose in a positive way, how should be adapting to create or adapt to the new demand for different types of employment?
Yeah. So, the fundamentals we know are that there will be disruption. It's the sort of disruption that will affect different people. So, sort of, white collar workers, knowledge workers, because generative AI, obviously, the LLM in large language models, language. So they are good at interpreting language, creating language, summarizing, and manipulating knowledge. So we know there is going to be impact. There's going to be disruption. We know we know that there will be replacement of jobs and roles. I think it's much more difficult to say what they're going to be. I mean, I think everybody wants to try and work that out. And I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I'm not sure what to tell her about the
Yeah.
kind of career that she might want to go for. Not
Yeah.
that she would listen to me anyway, but you know.
Yeah.
Um, so we know there's going to be disruption. We know it's going to be in the sort of knowledge work area. I think at the moment, and we've talked about, there's a massive amount of hype about the level of impact it's going to have.
Yeah.
And I do agree it is going to disrupt. But I think at the moment, at least, the vast majority of the applications that are successful in getting some traction they augment what we already do, and they accelerate our processes, whatever it is that we're doing. So the work, like really sort of getting down to the coal face here, the work that I'm doing with organizations is how do we, if you're writing reports and you know what the structure of that report is and you know where the data is, and that report could take you half a day to create, we can create a sort of a very simple process with generative AI at its heart, which will produce those sorts of things effectively instantly, and you can't allow an AI to do that completely autonomously. You have to have people that are there looking at the results. So they're using an AI tool to accelerate their workday. But they're not redundant. They're there they are there doing the QA. They are there looking at what's going on and doing the editing and adding their voice and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I reckon there are certain tasks where you can save 30 to 50% of the work time and get a better result. So you're you're finding efficiencies and boosting productivity and creativity to some extent, depending on how you're using them. So yeah, and I mean a good example of this, I do talks around generative AI. I did one last week. There was sort of 40-ish people in the audience listening, and it's really interesting to see the sort of body language of people as I talk about and show them how this is done. And some people are really excited because they realize that they've got to go to work tomorrow and they've got to write this thing that it's going to take them half a day, and they can instantly see how they can accelerate that process.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the people in the audience, actually probably the sort of quarter of the people in the audience, their body language just says, oh no, because they feel like it's taking away something from them that they enjoy, or they feel it's part of their work, and so I think that's probably a sort of reasonable representation of how people are responding to this.
Yeah. I saw somebody on LinkedIn yesterday, and he was a copywriter and saying he just can't get any work at the moment, and whether it's because of AI or not, it probably has some sort of connection to it. But it's about that person is obviously got to realise that the demands for his maybe the work he used to do is probably not going to be there, so he needs to adapt and do more specialist work, maybe just to be a bit more of a specialist niche sort of copywriter or something like that. But there is obviously the important thing is to be able to have the mindset around adapting and accepting, because the more you fight it, the more it's going to just wind you up. You just got to think, right, okay, it's coming, I've just got to accept it. How do I adapt? Because there's certain people that will always see the negative, but then there'll be others that always see the positive and see the opportunities that it brings.
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember whatever it was 2 years ago when I was seeing the sort of rise of the GPTs and generative AI, and I thought to myself, so I do obviously have a history in tech and a fascination with AI anyway, so I'm slightly different. But, I thought the same. I thought, it's coming. I'm either going to be surfing or going under. And so, that's a bit extreme, but that's the way I kind of think about it. There's nothing we can do to change what's coming. We can be up in arms. And although I'm very bullish about generative AI, I have my eyes open to some of the issues, and I think I probably have a better idea about some of the disruption that's coming, a more realistic idea about some of the disruption that's coming. So I'm by no means a kind of a Silicon Valley bro about this stuff. I'm much more practical. But yeah, I just don't think it's a phenomenon that's going away. I think that pivotal moment probably happened when there was that furore at an OpenAI, when Sam Altman got fired and then rehired, and I think I think we might look back at that moment and say, well, there was a time that this could have been open source and all the rest of it, but actually now it's commercial. It's going to affect us all.
Right. So going on to that from that point then. So regulation wise, what can governments do? Is there anything they can do to sort of keep us safe as such?
Well, I should say this is not my area of expertise, but I do sort of keep an eye on this, but and obviously the EU are regulating in a sort of much more, I don't know, draconian is probably too harsh, but they're putting into some really significant regulations in place. The US is kind of equivocating a bit, and the UK seems to be a little bit more liberal about this stuff at the moment. That's my takeaway. Again, I'm not an expert by any means, but I think, I think to some extent the industry is moving so fast that I struggle to keep up, and I'm on it every day. And I find it very difficult to see how these sort of large, slow-moving bodies are going to be able to keep up and do anything really, really impactful. Having said that, at the moment, obviously, that these regulating bodies and governments do have the ability to do that if they can focus on it or take it seriously.
It's one of those. It's going to be a tough one, isn't it? But I think it's one of those things that if you just leave it to a commercial organisation, then there's going to be trouble along the way. So there need to be some sort of government sort of intervention to make sure that the general population are looked after, because obviously, that's how I see it. I see them just putting things in place so that the general public that aren't aware of these things are protected in some way. But how they do it, who knows? We'll find out in the coming years, I guess.
So in that, we've obviously, the social media has gone off the rails and has caused. So it's difficult to know on aggregate whether it's good or bad, but has certainly been the cause or a driver of some pretty significant issues in sort of the developed world, I guess, but maybe elsewhere too. So that's a sort of the canary in the coal mine for how technology can surprise us in a negative way. So we should learn from that.
Yeah, definitely. Luke, I'm just going to give you an opportunity to step back and just I'm going to share a few bits and pieces, thoughts on what we talked about with regards to my 7-step process. And like I said before we went live with you, I think AI has an effect on all 7 steps particularly. But I'm going to focus on an individual and why you would or why you wouldn't embrace something like AI. And when we talk about motivations, different people are motivated by different things. And if you are, as you described in your audience, there are certain people that are almost lit up and can see the opportunity and want to embrace it. Other people are cowering down and thinking, oh my God, this is certainly not what I want to hear, and it's certainly not something I particularly want to embrace because I don't really know what the implications are. So understanding yourself is key to all things, and I also think when you're thinking about businesses with regards to AI, I think it can have a massive effect on systemizing things, as you've already alluded to. There's opportunities there to just be more efficient. So systemizing things is about putting processes in place that need to be replicated, and if you can get a machine to do it as opposed to a person, there are benefits, but not saying that machines can take over everything. But those 2 particular areas, but like I say, all 7 steps, AI has an effect. But I think with regards to just moving on to motivation, that's particularly something that drives people's behaviour. So let's remember what motivation is. Motivation is the reason, being the motive, to act. So motivation is the reason we do something. So why would we do something to like embrace AI? Well, someone who is creator, driven by creativity and innovation, will be seeing the opportunities because that's they like. They like change. They like new ideas. They like to implement things that are new. So someone that's high growth, and in particular the creator motivator, I see as someone who would see AI as an opportunity. On the opposite side of the scale, I suppose you could say, is that someone who is defender motivated and they seek security, predictability, and stability might be seeing actually this is going to disrupt things, and I don't know how things are going to be in the future. So it takes away all the stability and predictability, and so AI just disrupts everything for them. And so the things that they come to work for, being those things, are not there anymore. So those sort of people will be the type of person that you described, where their shoulders went down and thinking, "Oh my God," you know. So just a brief look into motivation as a factor. Anything that you have to say with regards to what I said there, Luke?
So going back to the first slide that you showed there, you pointed out the sort of the mirror and the systemized elements of that. So one of the interesting things about generative AI is that as it's sort of created from teaching from these vast data sets, and it has no like perspective of its own. So when you talk about mirror, it makes me think when you're using generative AI, you need to tell it what it is to be able to respond to you. And so like you're almost, you have to give it context. You can tell it, I want you to act like a something. And it's interesting because we obviously, here are you and I on this blog podcast, and we have a situation, we have a context, we have a background, we have our own knowledge, whereas generative AI is just a sort of this homogenous sort of thing, which there's knowledge, and it will try and answer your questions, but it doesn't have any opinions or perspective. It just is what it is. So that sort of correlates with your mirror kind of thing. And then you talked about systemization, and again, something that's interesting about generative AI is that the historical established forms of technology are very procedural, and they're almost they work very well with building systems because when you program a workflow, it's not going to change like when you use it every time. Whereas generative AI is a bit more quirky. It's not random, but it's it's a bit more generative. It can do things. If you answer the same question twice, it might come back with different answers. Particularly if you tell it to act as something different. So if you're thinking about generative AI and systemization, I would encourage people to think about augmenting the process of systemization. So fuzzy stuff like if you've got a bunch of data or a document that's a part of a system, you can get it to categorize that or to summarize that or to do something that adds value to your system. And so it's just a bit different to how traditionally you might think about systemization.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, because I think sometimes you can only work something out with regards to what you already know. So with regards to AI, you don't know what it knows. So you say, this is the outcome I'm looking for. So you could say, well, I want to systemize this process. This process must do this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And then you give that information and say and then it'll come up with a solution, which might be garbage, but it might actually open up a completely different way of doing something. So that's the excitement of it. Is you say, well, actually, we never thought of that because we never would be able to get our heads around all that information. But because AI can process lots of information in a different way, then that means other options become available, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that sort of leads me on to, at the moment, there's a lot of what I would label like version 1 solutions for things, and I'm hearing this, and some of them aren't very good, right? So you'll try something and you'll be a bit disappointed with the result, and I that's normal at the beginning of a new wave of something, a technology. Um, but if and so I hear this, whether it text generation or image generation, people complaining about some of the quirks of that. And I think there's two things to think about in that context. One of them is the art is how you use them. Like you talked about the rubbish in, rubbish out stuff. In this case, there's multiple ways to get rubbish in and out. One of them is prompting, and if you're not good at prompting, you're likely to get rubbish out. And of course, the other one is the data. And the second consideration is anything that looks terrible today, in 6 months' time, is probably going to be quite good. So if you're looking at something going, no, it's never going to work, I suspect it probably will, and it probably won't be that long before it does.
Interesting. Look, we've got a little bit of time already, and there's loads more other things I'd like to ask you, but unfortunately the time's gone. So thank you for your time today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and maybe we should continue it at some point, because there's lots more we can discuss. But thank you again for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Great stuff. So if AI is something that you want to learn more about, then Luke's your guy. Get in touch with Luke. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to have a discussion about that. And if you picked up anything that we've discussed and you've got any comments or any questions with regards to anything I've said or Luke said, then feel free to leave a comment wherever you're watching this on replay, and we will get back to you. We would be delighted to do that. So just before we just wrap things up then, just to remind you, my book, where the 7-step process, I talk about those 7 steps that I mentioned with the M.E.A.S.U.R.E process. Then they're all there's a chapter each of the 7 steps, and also there's 2 other chapters in that book about the keys to enjoying the journey and also looking after yourself, which are equally important. If you'd like to contribute to the podcast, then Buy Me a Coffee is a great way to do that. And you can click on or scan that QR code, and you'll be taken straight through to my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you buy me a coffee. It's not a physical coffee, but it's you'll know the concept. It's just about just thanking me for the content and contributing to keeping the show on the road with regards to the podcast. So that's it for today. Thank you for those who joined us again, and if you are catching some replay, as I said, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. But until the next episode of the Motivated Business Show, have a great day, and I'll catch you very soon.